Welcome back to X-Raysed, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. If you've been following our podcast, you already know one of our guests today needs very little introduction. She is one of our most insightful recurring voices and someone who consistently helps us make sense of big shifts before they become obvious. Laina Chan. She's an award-winning barrister, founder and CEO of MiAI Law, and one of Australia's most influential legal innovators, and recently highlighted among the women to watch in Australia's legal sector. I have to add this and break this to everyone. She continues to shape how AI supports not replaces human judgment in law. And joining her today is someone she specifically invited for this conversation, David Ioannidis, advisory board member of MiAI Law, portfolio manager at Rolling Capital Management, and former senior leader in global financial markets at JP Morgan. With decades of experience in fixed income trading and capital markets, I'm sure he has the ability to translate market movements into real world meaning. So, Laina, welcome back. Congratulations on the recent recognition, one of the women to watch in Australia's legal sector. And of course, thanks for bringing over Dave to our show. So, hi, Dave. It's a pleasure to have
Hi
you here.
there. Thanks for the very kind introduction. Appreciate that.
It's pretty exciting, Miles, because the journalist didn't tell me what she was going to say. She didn't ask me. All she said was, I'm going to include you in the list and could you share a photograph with me? So yesterday when we saw the LinkedIn post come in, we went in there and we're like, oh my goodness, what is she going to say about us? But then she captured my AI law. So I was like, oh, phew. Good.
Yeah, well, you deserve it, Lena. What a milestone. And thank you again, Dave, for being here, especially with our topic, which comes at the perfect moment. Because over the last couple of weeks, I learned from Lena there have been sharp reactions to AI related news, including the release of contract review capability from Anthropic, and suddenly investors are questioning assumptions that felt unquestionable just months ago. So help us unpack whether this is a panic or just a structural reset. So with the recent market's sharp reaction to AI developments, Dave and Lena, of course, from where you both sit, what actually changed in the real world and what was simply price movement catching up with reality?
Well, I think maybe it's helpful to have a few metrics to refer to. So since the Claude Cowork release of the plugins, including the legal one back in the end of January, I think there's been about $1 trillion of market cap wiped off the software sector. I think the IGV ETF, which is the broad software kind of index tracker from BlackRock, is down about 16%. I think a small bounce overnight, but down about 16%. Off about 20% year to date, and that's in a world where the S&P is pretty much unchanged, and the Nasdaq's off 3 or 4%, which obviously has the software sector sitting inside it. So, yeah, is it a panic? I don't think so. It's a repricing of the multiples for long duration software cash flows. I mean, Lena and I have been talking about it for quite some time, that there was a come to Jesus moment ahead for at least some of the platforms that exist in the legal AI world. And I think that's what's going on at the moment. Revenues aren't necessarily falling and adoption's not necessarily collapsing, but prices are being adjusted because multiples need to be taking into account the fact that the capability is moving further upstream, and models that essentially are packaging up capabilities are going to be under threat.
Mm-hmm. And love the metrics back there. So it's just repricing. Thanks for the lead, Dave. And Lena, I'd love you to add your perspective here.
Well, Dave and I have been talking about it because normal companies, when are priced on a multiple of 10 to 15 of their annual recurrent revenue for their prices, but AI companies have been priced at multiples way in excess of that. Like Harvey's at what, 50? Is that right? Over a multiple of
Large
50.
number like that, yeah.
And then Lagora is supposedly just closing their next round of funding. And according to them, their valuation has tripled in 4 months. I don't know if their revenue has tripled in 4 months, but they have gone to market, and according to the newspapers or the legal tech news, that they're about to close their round at a valuation of $6 billion, when a few months ago, they were only valuing themselves at 1.8 billion. And so this news, I saw this a couple of days ago. So I don't know if the repricing may be on the trading floor, but in private market valuations, some companies seem to be still holding on to the exuberant pricing. I mean, which is great for us, of course,
Yeah.
as a privately held company, but it just
Right.
doesn't seem sustainable.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think that the private markets will eventually be affected by because they point to multiples in the listed markets as well. But I mean, we'll get to these points soon. I think the really key thing is that products that differentiate, and that's what we've been talking a lot about with our product. They're going to not only be able to hold up, but outperform dramatically as the features that they have really prove that they can't be replicated simply by people using LLM models themselves, or even continuing to use the products that are out there that are kind of glorified wrappers.
And I appreciate that you kind of touch on what we're going to discuss further. And what you've mentioned is a very important insight, because from the outside, it can look like something that just broke overnight, when in reality, the shift may have been building for months. And that leads directly to the moment that seemed to trigger outsized reactions. And Anthropic released what seemed like a single capability contract review, yet the market reaction was dramatic. So, Dave, what do you think did that movement reveal about hidden fragilities investors may have been ignoring?
I think the important thing about the important thing about Claude is not just that they released the Claude Copilot contract review feature, is that they made it open source.
Yeah, that's key. And it wasn't just in for a legal plugin as well. There were multiple. There was financial and other workflows in there. I mean, I thought it was interesting that the legal industry was the one that kind of got the most press and was attacked heavily. But you've seen it across, all the software services, as we've seen by talking about the index. But even recently, like towards the end of last week, you saw large property companies get hit quite hard. Any business that they're looking into it and saying, well, are we going to be able to take away revenue streams as people can automate things that these people charge for, are coming they're coming under a fair bit of scrutiny. I think the interesting thing, and Laina and I have talked a little bit about this, is that it's not necessarily all a negative. And this is outside of the legal space. But across more broad markets, I think, you can say, okay, well, revenue streams have disappeared, but ultimately, if the cost of providing better services goes down and you do have traction and stickiness with your customers, then potentially some of those businesses may end up being better off. And so you're getting this weird thing where there's some, to the private market point, where it seems like these two big businesses that potentially could come under a lot of the same pressures that the listed markets are coming under are talking about getting these raises done at big up levels. And that's probably something, if we didn't know that information, that would have surprised us, I think, given what listed markets have done. So, it's a work in progress trying to come up with the thesis that actually makes a lot of sense and be able to make judgment calls across, different sectors and also the products that exist within those sectors. And,
well, you should tell Miles about the fact that the market has been correcting anyway over the past few months. For example, Atlassian has been consistently sliding.
I mean, Atlassian is a topical example because it's in the press at the moment here in Australia. But I think the metric I talked about $1 billion of market cap gone since the Claude Cowork.
$1 trillion, you mean?
Sorry, $1 trillion, I should say, of market cap gone since the 31st of Dec. But before that, since the highs in October, it's about 2 trillion. So the same magnitude of loss that you've seen in market cap since that event at the 31st of January had already occurred since October in any case. And if you look at the Atlassian share price, I mean, it's had a small bounce overnight, sitting in the low 80s to mid 80s. But it was as high as 450 back in 21. But it was it well into the 200s not that long ago. And so it's meaningful pullbacks in markets as people trying to work out, well, are these guys going to have a moat around the things that they offer, or are people going to be able to go and replicate them in their own way using the plugins and the type of thing that the LLM models are releasing?
And it's just interesting how one release can suddenly expose assumptions people didn't even realize they were making, which brings us to a phrase that's been
But it
floating
is
around.
interesting,
Mhm.
Miles, because back in December, OpenAI released the contract review feature as well,
Uh-huh.
and to the market, directly to the market. And Google released the Google Notebooks. And these features are all incorporated. I don't know if they're using those particular models, but they're incorporated to Harvey, etc. You can have, and Lexis, you can have Google Notebooks, you can upload up to 50,000 documents, maybe. I think that's the number. And then you can interrogate it. And then obviously Harvey has their contract review features. But the market didn't blink in early December. And when I saw it, I obviously reached out to Dev and I said, look, the LLMs are coming for their clients.
Uh-huh.
But nobody reacted. But it was the release of Claude's features on a open source basis that I think led people to think, oh, well, at least I think in-house innovation teams will be able to maybe do this themselves. But it's not that easy,
I'm sure.
It's
No,
not
and
that
it's
easy to be able to just do it yourself, because a plugin on an open source basis is now available.
Mhm.
yeah, no, that's so true. After seeing the journey that we've been on and Laina's hard work with Arjun as well, like it's the governance and the accountability and being able to point to all the correct sources for these things, that is a big step away from just someone building their own little tool with an LLM and being able to point to a database and hope that
Mhm.
what the
Mhm.
LLM spits out is accurate and usable and defensible. And that's in the
Yes.
legal space in particular is really key.
But
Mhm.
also in the financial space, I mean, if you're trading and you're using these language models or to help you source data, etc., you need to know where it came from, and you need to know, preferably on a pinpoint basis, exactly where it came from in the reports. Otherwise, it's just,
Yeah,
you
of
can't
course.
use it.
Yeah, I mean it's really funny. There's been a lot of things. I mean, obviously you would have seen in the car wash piece that's been kind of flapping around in the last few days, where the models are asked, if I live 150 meters away from the car wash, should I drive my car there to get it washed or should I walk? And most of the models are coming back, well, it's such a short distance, you should walk, forgetting the fact that the car needs to be there to be washed. And people are pointing to this as a really good example about the fact that these models, they can do a lot of great things, but they can still make really silly mistakes. And,
But these models are only predicting. I mean, they're only guessing what the next word is going to be, subject to some constraints. So really, everything is a guess.
yeah, yeah.
If you're
And
just
even with
using a
you,
language model as a wrapper, even if you
yeah,
post-train it and try to make it behave in the way you want to behave, at the end of the day, it's only a probabilistic model.
yeah,
Mhm.
and the agentic stuff, which is, developing really quickly and it's probably a step on from the conversation we're having today. But some of the agentic development is super exciting. But one thing I'd say again to kind of point out some of the weaknesses, I read something yesterday where it was a sales team and the senior guy, they've been using the agents to come up with all the metrics and making decisions about, closing down locations, investing in locations, all of that type of stuff for about 4 or 5 months. And someone asked to check a bit of data and the senior went back and checked it and they found out that they've been making business decisions, real business decisions, big dollars, based on hallucinations that the model was giving them. They just assumed it was spitting out the right thing. So I think
Great.
all of these things are really important to kind of bear in mind when we're talking about how exciting the progress is, but we also need to be really careful. And that's where this whole accountability thing that we really focus on at MiAI is so, so key. Some of the legal products out there can tell you things, but we can actually tell you and prove where they came from and make sure they're justifiable because it's
Mhm.
not just the wrapper, it's all the algorithmic stuff and all the reasoning, the brains of Lane are built into the tool, and
Mhm.
that's a differentiator for sure.
Uh-huh.
That,
And that's what
that I think.
she's been telling our audience about, that we have to be really careful, be cautious, because the models cannot be smarter than us in terms of, their reality. And as I was saying earlier, this
But what
point,
they are great about, what they
mm,
are great at, is that they can mine through huge vats of data,
yeah, because
right?
there's a
So
lot.
then there's so much out there. And so if you're using it in a RAG system, a retrieval augmented generation
Hmm.
system, then it can mine through the whole database. Well, at least subject to limits, because you have to put in limits. Otherwise, the reports will take forever to generate. That is way beyond what a human mind can process.
I agree.
So it's smarter in that way. Is it smarter? It's just more, it has more capacity.
It has a bigger capacity than
It has a bigger capacity, yeah.
And that's why you built it. And this point brings us to a phrase that's been floating around lately. Some commentators are calling this SaaSpocalypse. So from both of your perspectives, is this really a collapse, or is the market finally repricing assumptions as Dave touched on earlier that it's been avoiding for years?
Well,
Can I answer? Can I just make a comment, David, because
sure.
you do, because I just think it's really funny. I've linked it with a girl. I won't name her on LinkedIn. She's I think she's Russian. And when all this happened in the market, people were talking about this SaaSpocalypse, right? And obviously all the founders were coming up and saying why they still had a moat. Founders who had built just wrappers on language models, they came out and said they still had a moat. And this girl, she just said to one straight out founder, she said that companies like yours will not survive. And then because you have your technology is out of date and etc. Right? She just called it out. And then another founder said, I'm surprised that as a fellow founder that you would say this. And then she said to me, I just don't understand why, people can't handle the truth, basically. And what she did was she was speaking the truth, but what she didn't do was pay the politeness tax. And so while I think she didn't pay the politeness tax, she straight into juggling. But the point is, a lot of companies will not succeed, will not survive if they don't have a moat where their product can be easily just supplied replicated or just supplied directly by OpenAI or Claude or Anthropic or Gemini, etc. But if you have a genuine moat, it may not be a technology moat. It may be, I don't know, you're so embedded so deeply and you satisfy the company's posture on governance, ethics, etc., security, and you're already embedded in it and you genuinely feel maybe you're part of the workflow. I know a lot of companies are banking on that being enough for their moat. You may succeed, but you may not be worth as much. I don't know. I just think the multiples are going to come down. Some companies will go away, but I don't think it's an overall SaaSpocalypse. What do you think, Dave?
No, I agree. And I mean, I think just the old assumption that software is just above disruption and that you can have these never-ending kind of growth, hockey stick shaped revenue charts and that type of thing, that's being reevaluated. And I think, now markets are just repricing, as Laina said, back to multiples that make a bit more sense. They're going to start differentiating between the companies within those groups, and some will disappear and others will trade at better multiples because their moats are actually stronger. And it's all about proving defensibility and the fact that switching out of that software is going to be more expensive, that they've got their own data sets that are protected, all of those types of things. And it's going to be a really interesting period. But I think one thing we can say with certainty is these lofty multiples that you just applied. I mean, I remember you'd look at businesses and you say, this is a set of businesses, it should trade around this multiple. Here's a set of software as service businesses, and that should trade at this multiple. And you kind of think, but why? Well, that but why moment has happened now. And look, they're still going to trade. Anything with AI is still going to have a premium, I think, compared to standard businesses, especially the ones that make sense. But interestingly, some of the ones that are going to fail because they're not protectable are going to, their multiples will end up getting to the point where those businesses disappear. So,
but this happened in the early 90s, right? We had this internet when the web and all the new web companies showed up. We had this web apocalypse. We did, didn't we? And this web apocalypse. But the same thing happened, right? The companies that had no competitive advantage disappeared, but it's not like all internet companies went off along with it.
It's a great example of efficient markets. It's kind of how it's meant to work.
Yeah. Well, it's an infinite space. So I agree with you with the endless disruption. And I guess that's reassuring in a way, what Dave told us earlier, because repricing suggests correction. not catastrophe in this case. But if assumptions are shifting, the next question becomes unavoidable. So, Dave, what core assumptions about AI company valuations are now being challenged, particularly around expansion potential, pricing power, and what you've been telling us since earlier, defensibility, especially for companies, but that built directly on top of LLMs?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, there's two things there. Things that are built on top of LLMs and don't have a lot of value add, they're going to be the businesses that really are at threat. And especially with the models rolling out capability further upstream, users can, if there's simple workflows that don't need accountability and there's not as much governance needed, well, then that's a pretty simple conclusion to get to as to what's going to happen. But I think, with expansion, like if you talk about the Atlassian thing, they say, okay, well, if we can start to do these things ourselves, then we need less, desktop real estate for that app within our business. So you might go from a certain amount of users to half of those amount of users. So expansion it's just not an assumption that as businesses grow, they'll all need that application. And I think from a pricing power perspective, unless you're rolling out features that are really, really valuable and not replicable, well, then pricing power, we talked about it before, it's just packaging really of features, and that's not very defendable. And I think, the durability and the duration that you can protect, a series of workflows for is also key as well. And that's why I talked earlier about the kind of the long dated nature of cash flows being challenged. That's, you can't just assume that going out for the forecast, the longer term forecast schedule that you're going to be able to grow and even sustain those types of revenue numbers. So yeah, there's a lot going on, and I think there will be further. It's we're talking about roughly a 20% underperformance from the software sector to the broad market, called the S&P 500 in the last little while. Will that continue? That dispersion continue? I possibly think it could get a little larger. But I think right now what's going on is the smart equity analysts are digging down, at least in the listed companies, digging down into the capabilities and which businesses are going to survive and which ones aren't going to survive. So I think now it's not so much about what the index does to the broad market. It's more about what the individual businesses within that software sector do versus each other. And that's going to be the key. And that's something in the unlisted space, in the private space, where we're really confident about our product, in the sense that we feel we do a lot of things that others can't, and it's very difficult to replicate. And I mean, Laina can talk more about that.
I mean, it can be. Well, obviously, any business can be replicated, but it's not easily replicable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a better way of saying it. It's very difficult. Yeah, very difficult to replicate. I like to think it's
difficult, but not impossible. Anyway. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I like the idea of defensibility, Dave, and what you said earlier, sustainability or the lack of moat. It's something business owners across industries are probably thinking about right now, which makes legal AI a fascinating case study. So, Laina, I would love you to lead here, and perhaps Dave could add the market implications. Legal AI appears to be one of the first verticals feeling these repricing. Why does the legal profession respond differently to AI capability? And if this isn't the end of legal AI, what is it the end of?
Very interesting question. We need to break the legal sector into different sectors, because the barristers that I actually have built this product for are very resistant to the product. We do have barrister subscribers, but typically as a whole, they're very resistant. I think they find it very challenging, confronting for them that I might have built something that cannot be, that they can actually do something better than they can do it themselves. So for example, a silk expert in property law, he told me he was trying to do a research problem, locate a case on a particular issue, and he couldn't. He said he looked everywhere, I assumed using traditional research methods. And he also said he looked at Gemini. Gemini gave him the answer, but had no reasoning, no case authority, no nothing, right? And so this person was actually looking. So I said to him, well, why don't you look at MiAI Law? I mean, you've got a trial subscription, why don't you? And I said, give me the question, I'll ask it. So I asked it, I did a light research case question. a deep case research question, and I also asked the question in the legislation research. So in 10 minutes, I ran all of those concurrently, and we got the 3 reports. I sent it to him, and he came back and he said, very impressive. So then the next day I said to him, well, how was it? I said, were there any mistakes in there? He goes, no. So we had identified the correct legislation. We had extracted the relevant section. We had cross-checked it against the case law. Everything was correct. Found him multiple cases. And it came to the same conclusion as Gemini, but the reasoning path was there. The sources were there. Everything was there. Mm-hmm. And I said to him, well, why don't you just try MiAI Law? You've got it, right? You've had it since beta. And he basically said, why would I charge 10 minutes for something that I could have charged 3 hours for? And so the interests are not aligned. They think that using us will lead to lower billings, but you and I already know from the users that we have had on this podcast that actually it increases their billings, not from the grunt work, because we take up the time that would have been chewed up doing the grunt work is gone, but you do need to check the reports, trace it through, and then work out your reasoning and your strategy, etc. So that bit increases. But barristers as a whole, I think, are misconceived that they think that using us is going to. So I think they're trying to generally ignore us and hope that we'll just go away. But then the small firms, the ones who know us, they think, oh, wow, this really helps us. Yeah. And then the bigger firms, the medium-sized firms, and even the large ones, they're talking to us, they're trialing and everything. And so I think that, and the regional firms, we have a regional firm subscribing. So I just think we're hoping for product-led growth, right? We don't advertise, we don't do anything, apart from me talking to you, but then I don't even publicize this podcast of ours very much. It just really needs time for people to calm down and realize that we're not here to replace you. We're really here to empower you and enhance your productivity. Mm-hmm. Not productivity, but your knowledge base and get you better serve your clients. So, but I think we're the only ones, aren't we, that are out there going, we're actually here to enhance capability, whereas all of the other AI products seem to be just pushing efficiency. And they keep saying, look, we'll save you time, we'll save you time, we'll save you time. And I think that's very confronting, isn't it, for companies who have a time billing system. So for them, it could mean, or probably it will mean, that you need less bodies, right, to do the work.
And I mean, we've heard it from Anderson and Halia, right? I mean, they have to check out those episodes, I guess.
Yeah, but I think there's different products. So in the legal tech market, you have to look at the different segments, and then how they react to the various products is different. And also the products themselves, most of them are just pushing efficiency. Mm-hmm. We're not necessarily pushing efficiency. Of course, there is an increase in efficiency, but for us, with our main push is an increase in capability.
Mm-hmm. So makes them more, not just efficient, but confident about what the AI is giving them and what they contribute to the actual research that they have.
But I think quickly it's coming in the last 2 years, there would be no companies using AI, but now a lot of them are. And then the big firms, I've noticed that they have a, fear of missing out mentality. So if 3 of the big firms use a certain product, then the other 2 go, well, we need to have it as well. So it's become table stakes, right? You have to have it, or otherwise you are not on a level playing field with the others. So eventually, I suppose every company is going to have to use it because they lose competitive advantage. And that's what a friend of mine from Asha said, that she looked at our product and she said, if we don't have your product, then we lose competitive advantage. And I think that's what's going to happen, isn't it? I mean, it might take a long time to get off the ground, but then eventually those people who the early adopters hopefully spread the word, and then eventually people will think, if I don't have whatever product it is that all of my competitors are using,
I think more testimonials would do about.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily talking about us, right? I'm just talking about generally across the market. Like, one person has Copilot. Now everybody has Copilot.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then one person has, this particular contract review feature, then everyone has to try it. It's just, but it's just a lot of
Hype.
FOMO. FOMO, isn't it? It's FOMO.
Yeah.
And then it's going, I have to have it because this has now become a basic tool that we have to have. I think maybe that's what's happening in legal. Slowly, because there are some very conservative people. But then there's also segments of the market who are willing to be more innovative and to be more open to embracing technology. And then once they have it,
Right.
you don't really want to go to court, against a barrister, one person who has it and the other one who doesn't have it, because it's all very well for you to be so excited that when you're sitting in your chambers, you can charge 3 hours for something that my AI might do in 5 minutes. But if you're sitting in court and you want to, and you've got a junior, because you can't be presenting in court and doing the research yourself. But sometimes things come up in court and you're like quickly checking using traditional methods to see, does that case actually exist? What does that case actually say? My opponent has thrown something at me that I just don't know about. If you've got a junior, that junior can check and then the answer will come up very quickly. You really do gain competitive advantage and also a reduction in your anxiety levels. There's nothing more stressful than going to court and having your opponent, and having your opponent throw things at you. And even the judges, like my judge friends have said, does that mean that, when a barrister names a case that I have never heard of, I can actually then ask the model, what is this case? What's the case say?
Okay,
I don't know, it's a very long-handed way of answering your question. But anyway.
But yeah.
With respect to the legal tools repricing, more quickly and potentially more heavily, it's just about where the trusted workflow sits. Like, Thomson Reuters, for instance, I think is off circa 29% since the end of January, which is a big number. And I think that's people saying, okay, well, can that workflow that they're doing for us be substituted more quickly and with the same types of accountability within these models? So I'm not exactly sure that answers the question. I think that the legal industry the legal tools got hit first, and that, as I explained earlier, it kind of then flowed down into other sectors and even with a long delay of over a week for, say, real estate. But I think ultimately it doesn't mean that the legal AI tools are going away. It just means that the accountability and the reliance on governance and all of that type of stuff is so important that if these things can be done internally by firms without that, then the big firms like Thomson, for example, were getting hit really hard. I'm not sure that really answers the question, but it's
can you ask me my question again? I mean, what are you, Miles, what are you trying to get out of me? I don't really understand this word vertical.
Yeah, I don't like my answer either, by the way. Can we cut that answer?
Can we redo the last? Yeah, but redo the last.
Yeah, the last question.
What do you mean?
Yeah,
no, because people keep talking about legal verticals. They always do.
I think what you're saying is that because obviously with the Claude Cowork plugins released, legal was one of them. We talked about finance and other flows and that. So, but legal was the one where the press really got hold of it and the moves were the biggest, the most quickly. And I think you're asking why. And my answer was actually rubbish then because it made no sense. But I actually don't think I have an answer to the question because it's the thing that's interesting is that legal was hit first and hardest, but I'm not sure that there's a reason for that. It might just be that people thought that the contract review and that type of thing all of a sudden could be done internally, and therefore the products that were out there that they're doing that for lawyers got hit really hard. But I'm not necessarily sure there's a differentiation between legal and the rest of the industry.
No, I think I get it. I get it. I want to answer this question again. Are you saying when you say it's a shallow vertical, that means it might be branded legal, but there's no particular legal doctrine that's been embedded into these models, so therefore, it's easily replicable. A deep vertical is one where the company has embedded their domain expertise into the model, so it's not easily replicable.
I actually flip it the other way around and say that let's assume that the incumbent products are actually working well, whether they're just LLM wrappers or whatever the case. So when all of a sudden these plugins were released, and you said, okay, well, we can just go replicate workflows easily. The fact that legal needs to be more accountable, technically, I would have argued that that means that that industry would have been less affected because it's harder for the users, the end users, to go and build, their own version of these things with the same level of accountability without the, millions or even billions of dollars of investment that have gone into these products. So it's, I kind of flip it the other way.
Well, all wrappers operate by using the language model. They may post-train it with the data that they want to post-train it to try to make the language model more knowledgeable in their specific domain. Could be law. Lexis has done that. They've trained Mistral. And I don't know if Westlaw has done it. But then just on top of that, they just set a layer of prompts. And if you're using, they just set a layer of prompts on it. And then they backfill their answers. So they are searching for secondary answers in the secondary materials and then building the answer from back to front. So they're not really, and they haven't embedded legal reasoning. So they don't have a deep vertical. They haven't embedded legal reasoning. They haven't really encoded jurisdictional doctrine. They haven't got case law hierarchies. They haven't told their models how to construe legislation. They haven't included procedural logic. There's no, maybe for contract review things, I don't think they have embedded how to construe contracts, how the High Court has said that contracts have to be construed, all of this stuff. They haven't embedded any of that reasoning into their models. So there is no competitive moat. They don't have a deep vertical because they're only really relying upon the language models and a bit of prompt engineering to answer these questions or to satisfy the client's workflow or research, etc. So when OpenAI comes out, or Gemini and all these big companies, they're going to have to monetize and make their models profitable. They're not profitable at the moment. I think OpenAI just said that they're going to lose $14 billion this year. And then I think the market thinks, well, if you don't have a truly deep vertical, if you haven't embedded all of these characteristics into your model, then the LLM is going to come and just chew you up, and then it can just directly serve the client. You are not performing any particularly special service for the client, and so therefore we're going to reprice you to reflect that. But if you have a truly deep vertical, if you have all of these things and you have specifically catered to the legal market, to cater to their governance requirements, to make sure that your answers are auditable, that you can reveal your sources, that you have actually tried to and capture in your model how a lawyer might reason, and you've captured the jurisdictional hierarchy, you've captured all these things that a language model wouldn't know generically, then maybe in those cases, products like that would be priced differently because it does have a deep vertical. But if you don't have a deep vertical, if you're just a wrapper, then the market
I think that's really true within the legal space. But I think the question of overall why legal as a whole got hit, I keep coming back to my point I made a little bit earlier, that it doesn't actually make sense to me, because you're right, Laina. Like, let's say our product and all the benefits it has versus just a simple wrapper. That's easy. But within the broad legal sector, if you assume that with all the money that's been spent by these incumbent products, they haven't been able to give a lot of these things that you would need to use to get the right accountability levels around the outputs, then just giving a plug-in to a lawyer that says you can build those workflows yourself doesn't necessarily solve that accountability piece. So I actually think that legal getting hit, I guess, first and hardest doesn't necessarily make sense, because by rights, because of the accountability required, it should become harder to replace those incumbents in the legal space as opposed to other, maybe in the finance space or whatever.
Are you referring to Thomson, Lexis, etc.? But Lexis is not just legal; it does everything.
No, of course. No, but I'm just
and Thomson as well. So maybe it's not just legal being hit. Maybe it's being hit across the board because
yeah.
it doesn't just supply
That makes more
data
sense to
to.
me. That makes more sense to me because the legal vertical, if I can use that term again, I feel like that's harder for an end user with a plugin to build their own thing quickly and essentially steal revenue away from the incumbents in the legal space. But maybe it's those ones that are the big ones that have got the headline kind of losses. They're more broad businesses than just legal, and maybe in fact we're missing
Totally.
the
They're
point, and it's
right
not the
across.
legal piece that's replicable so simply.
Yeah. And
That makes sense
and
to
you're
me,
right.
that thesis.
All right. So for audience, if you're navigating legal risk, AI adoption, or simply trying to understand how technology is reshaping professional decision making, it's time to go click on the links below and connect with them for their ongoing insights into legal innovation and financial markets. Thanks for staying with us. Until our next episode with Laina and Dave, this has been your host, Miles. Stay focused, driven, and inspired with X-Raced.